Cool. So at this point, I've followed steps 0 and 1 in the README. So now I'm just going to go ahead and run my code. So again, I've installed all my things that I needed to for using npm and pip. So after having done all of that, now I'm just going to run the code. So npm run watch is going to be the first thing that I start running. So npm run watch, just so that you know what it does, is it makes your React into actual JavaScript code. So if you want to go and check what your React is actually being translated into, let's go ahead and open script.js. It's this massive file, like this super crazy file. You didn't write it, I didn't write it. It's basically this auto-generated file that React makes based on whatever you wrote in your React functions and components. So it's basically converting all of that into React code automatically. So all of this stuff is just like source code, etc., and it's just like this crazy thing that you don't have to worry about. You don't ever have to open it again after today. Script.js is basically just converting everything that we have in our React modules, in our React components, into this JavaScript file. So that's what npm run watch does. npm run watch basically says whenever we make a change to our React files, make sure that those changes are being picked up and being written out to script.js. Cool. So that was a little bit of an aside, but that's what npm run watch does. Then next we're going to run our Python. So this is going to be our backend. So again, we're going to go to lect10 socket, and then inside of here, we're going to do python app.py. Obviously, this starts up the backend and fires everything out. And now we have to run the front end. So the way that we run the front end is obviously go and do a preview running application. This is being cached right now. So let's go ahead and open up our inspector pane. And then as soon as you do that, when you do a refresh, I thought that should work, but maybe not. Let's try disable cache here and see if that helps. Yep, there we go. So you can go to network and then disable cache while DevTools is open, and then that will disable the cache and make sure that you actually have that open. So for now, I'm actually just going to make this super tiny so that so that I don't have to worry too much about it. But now this is always going to load. It's never going to depend on my cache. That's just a little trick that Sean taught me about, which actually makes it so that I don't have to worry about the caching. Great. So there's this awesome app. It's not that awesome, but let's see what it's doing. It basically is saying send up a random number. I have no idea what that means yet. And what it's doing is it's basically just generating a random number. That's not that interesting, right? It's all in JavaScript. It's not that cool that it's doing that. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at what the code is doing, because clearly there must be something interesting that's going on. So if I'm looking at the right side of my screen, or the left side of my screen, sorry, I'm going to see a few different folders here. Node modules is auto-generated. Don't have to worry about that. Scripts is something that I care about, so let's actually open everything inside of scripts. That's going to be all of our React classes. Script.js, don't worry about that. Templates, that's the index.html. And then let's see, app.py. Let's also open that up. I don't think we care about package lock, packages, readme.md, or web config right now. We already followed our readme.md, and that's why we don't care about it. Great. So the way that I figure out what's happening in a React app is always look at the backend first, and then move our way into the front end. So let's start by looking at our Flask app. So first, we have some import statements. We do our initial setup with app equals flask.flask. So this should look very familiar. These are two new lines. We've never seen anything about socket.io before. So let's skip over that for a second. Cool. App.route basically means that we're going to render index.html at this link. And then if we go here, we see a slash. So basically what we're seeing here is index.html. Let's keep that in mind for just a few minutes. And then this is really weird. There's socket.on, socket.on, socket.on. I have no idea what all of these things are. Let's skip over that for now. And then let's take a look at this. if name equals main. I have no idea what that does. Let's take a look at this. This is socket.io.run. Interestingly, we're not calling app.run, we're calling socket.io.run. So that's new and that's different as well. But interestingly, host, port, and debug are all the same things that we've always been doing. We're now passing an app to socket.io.run though. Cool. So there's a bunch of new stuff in here. But before we get into that stuff, let's talk about let's look at our index.html. So our index.html has nothing in the head, and then in the body, it's basically saying there's a content, and there's a script.js that loads after that. Cool. So this is just React. Basically, you're saying load our React stuff from script.js, and then content we're probably going to fill in with whatever our React components are. So if we go into our main.jsx, we see exactly that. We're saying get the element by ID, look for content, and then fill it in with whatever content is. Great. Content is basically saying, let's take, so it's a function, first of all, because again, we use functional React in this class. We don't use object-oriented React. So we're exporting a function content. And there's a hook here. So we're using the React use state. We take a name and we have the set number. We're saying we have a function called newNumber. And this function basically says react.useEffect. So this is another hook. And this hook is basically saying like on component mount. That's like the equivalent of this. What basically the same as like component did mount. We're called this stuff when the component finishes mounting. So useEffect basically means that when the component mounts, do this stuff. And then it's basically saying socket.on some stuff. I have no idea what socket.on is because we're not covering the socket.io stuff yet. Cool. And then we're calling the function here. So we made a function up here. We have to call the function, which is what we're doing here. And then it's returning this, which is basically a header saying random number, which is what we see here. Then a span saying 78, which a span basically means a text field. And then button, and we don't know what button is, so let's go ahead and check that out. Okay. So button has this function handle submit inside of it. Handle submit basically is generating a random number. So math.floor, so it's taking a random number, multiplying by 100, and then giving it to us. We generate a random number, and then it's saying socket.emit. We don't know what socket.emit does. And then it's sending up a random number to the server. That's interesting, but we'll get back to that. And then event.prevent default, that's basically saying that like, actually I don't know what that's doing, but something JavaScript-y that is happening when we do event.prevent default. Okay, cool. Then our export function, so this is what the actual component is. It's basically saying this is a form, and then within the form we have a button that has send up a random number. And then when the form is submitted, we say handle submit. So all of this code is being called as soon as you press this button. Like when this button is clicked, it submits the form. When the form is submitted, it calls all of this stuff. Great. So we have a holistic understanding of what the app does so far. Code is doing. Let's fill in the pieces of how these numbers are happening. Because again, we're making a number in the button, but we're not actually changing the state inside of content or anything, right? We're not actually passing that number to content or anything like that. So let's figure out what's happening with handle submit. So we made this random number, and then we call socket.emit. And what socket.emit is doing is it basically takes whatever this is. So if we just hover over it, I think it'll show us what's going on. Let me try just retyping it. I guess not. Okay, so socket.emit takes in two parameters. Basically, the first parameter, damn it, it just came, there we go. It's basically going to emit each of our listeners with supplied arguments. And what that means is basically, it's going to take an event handler. So this is just a string that says what event is currently happening. And then when you say whatever the event is, you can basically say, here are my updates. So what we're doing here is basically saying, like, here's a dictionary, or like basically JSON of whatever I want to update. So here's a key of a number, and then I'm saying, hey, my number has changed, and I'm just going to throw that to the server. I'm just going to be like, I made a new number for you. Do whatever the hell you want with that number, but all I'm going to tell you is that I've changed the number. And then we're doing a console.log. So then all we're going to do, so like let's just see and make sure that we understand the code correctly. So when I do this, I should see a new number being generated here. It says sent a random number, sent a random number 9 to server. Okay, great. So it's submitting a new random number, and that's random, and it's basically saying socket.emit with this event, this new update. So let's go ahead and actually open up our app.py because that is the server. So our app.py, let's go in here and see something interesting. So this says at socket.on new number, define this function. So it's going to print got an event for new number with data. So what this means is basically whenever this is happening, it's basically going to emit this update to any connected clients to itself. So this is the client, this is the server. It's telling the server there was an update with event name new number. So this socket is listening to that. It's basically saying, aha, there was a new number that was being passed. Cool. Now that there was a new number, I'm going to call all of this code. And the code that's being called is, I'm going to print that. So if we go down to our terminal, we should see that that random number 9 was actually being printed. So we see got an event for a new number with data random number 9. Great. So data is this special field basically, or it's not a special variable, but basically whatever is being passed in here, it can take in that data, and then that's basically JSON that we can parse through. So our random number here is basically being set to data number. So again, because our key was number here, it's the same key here that we have to have. We have to make sure those are the same values. So like if we change this to foo, then we have to change this to foo, and then everywhere else that we're using that, we have to make sure it's the same one. And then here on this side, we're saying socket io.emit number received this. So basically what it's saying is now we're going to broadcast out to all of our clients that a new number was received and the value is this new number. And then let's go ahead and figure out where that new number is going to be used. So we can probably venture to guess that that new number is being used inside of the content, right? Because we know that the content is displaying a number. So if we open that up, what we're going to see is inside of this component will mount, or component did mount, we're seeing socket.on number received. So that basically means that let's subscribe to changes that happen on number received. It's basically making a tunnel to the server and saying, whenever this says number received, I want to have an update about that. And it's the same data as before. And then once that data is passed in, it's going to say received a number from the server with the data number. So let's go ahead and check that in our console logs. I'm going to try filtering for it. And it says received a number from server 9. That's exactly what we expect, because once we receive the number, there's a log statement that basically says, aha, the server has a new number. It told us that new number and we received it because we're subscribing on this socket on this channel called number received. So now that we have that update, it's going to set the number. So it's going to call set number using data number. So that number, again, a data number is 9 in our case. So it's going to call set number, which again is a React hook. So it's basically going to say that number is now equal to 9. And then it's going to update that value inside of our span. So now it says random number 9. So that is how our sockets work. So let's go ahead and see this in action. Let's go ahead and open this up in a different browser. So when I press this button, it's generating a random number and passing it to the server. And then once that happens, the server is being like, hey, I'm going to say that I've received a new number. I'm just going to broadcast that out. And then on the other side, the other client, so this is a separate client, that client is basically being like, oh, I want to actually know whenever there were updates to that number so that I can change whatever I'm doing. And in this case, whatever it's doing is basically just using that as a state value to re-render on the website. So whenever we do this, it's basically doing that it's basically writing out to the server. It's saying, hey, I have a new number. And the server is broadcasting that change back to a different client. So it's actually a little bit more sophisticated than it looks. It's not just taking your number on the client and rendering a number on the client. It's making a call to the server and actually making that communication very transparent to the server so that the server can do whatever it wants every time. And next we're going to be talking about how we're going to be using something like this to persist inside of a database. We're going to, now we're basically still doing something where it's temporary data. Like if we refresh the page, it's going to go back to 0. So how do we persist this so that we make sure that whatever number was in there, we still have access to it?